Eventually, we'll wake up one day and they'll have us surrounded, and then our options will be limited.
We believe that they are developing other facilities like that, and it's a concern to the Biden administration, who's now working to try to counter it.
We are clear-eyed about the challenges posed by the PRC.
New revelations expose that China is closer to US shores than ever before. A growing presence in Cuba now a major concern for the Biden administration. Is this another Cuban missile crisis waiting to happen? Sky News Digital Originals presents China Tensions, the Cuba Plan. Terrifying revelations from the Wall Street Journal that the Chinese are looking to build a military training facility on the island of Cuba, less than 100 miles off the US coast.
We first reported that there was an agreement in principle for an electronic eavesdropping facility that was essentially all but done. We're reporting that now, as you say, that there's plans for a military training, a joint military training facility of some kind on Cuba, and so these are likely two different conversations or one and the same. It's very hard. The intelligence that's come in on any of this, I think there's kind of essentially a paucity of intelligence. So that leaves room for a lot of interpretation by different U.S. agencies about what it means and how far it could go. But what we're reporting is, the possibility of a deal that could put Chinese members of PLA 100 miles away from the Florida coast.
The Chinese are playing a game of Go, which is a 2,500-year-old board game where the objective is to surround more territory than your opponent. And so what you see playing out now is the Chinese doing that. They've been in the Middle East, right, with Iran and Saudi Arabia trying to broker a deal. They're with Russia trying to influence the Ukraine fight. They're now in the Caribbean in a overt way. They've been in Central America trying to do bases. And so what you see is them just trying to surround us all the way around. And similar to the balloons, it's just another way of exercising their power.
This is another indication of how comprehensive and aggressive China's threat is to the security of the United States and our vital interests around the world. We haven't faced a threat like this, Neil, since the end of World War II. I mean, that's the reality of what we're dealing with. They back in 2019, they had one listening post there, and they expanded it to 4. I'm thinking, Neil, our government can't tell us too much, but we have a Navy base there, and I got to believe that we're putting some capability in there to mitigate those listening posts. We have eye-watering listening post capability ourselves, and I think we know how to mitigate what the Chinese believe they're going to get from that. Putting some troops into Cuba certainly is disturbing. I think it's more about poking us in the eye and intimidating us. It doesn't have any consequential military value that I could see.
The Chinese government has denied it has plans to place troops on America's doorstep.
I am not aware of the situation you have mentioned. We hope that the parties concerned will put more effort into enhancing mutual trust.
The US-Cuba relationship has a complicated history. After the failed US attempt to overthrow the Castro regime in Cuba with the Bay of Pigs invasion, tensions quickly escalated between the two neighbours. In 1962, the Soviet Union reached an agreement to place Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba. The now famous images of several missile sites began the onset of the Cuban Missile Crisis.
This urgent transformation of Cuba into an important strategic base by the presence of these large, long-range, and clearly offensive weapons of sudden mass destruction constitutes an explicit threat to the peace and security of all the Americas.
The Cuban Missile Crisis quickly became one of the tensest periods of the Cold War.
But the greatest danger of all would be to do nothing. The path we have chosen for the present is full of hazards, as all paths are. But it is the one most consistent with our character and courage as a nation and our commitments around the world. The cost of freedom is always high, but Americans have always paid it. And one path we shall never choose, and that is the path of surrender or submission. Our goal is not the victory of might, but the vindication of right. Not peace at the expense of freedom, but both peace and freedom here in this hemisphere, and we hope around the world. God willing, that goal will be achieved.
Reports of an increased presence from China and Cuba are a stark reminder of the tense relationship the two countries have.
In many respects, it's less the intelligence than the symbology. If we remember back to the 1960s, the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? The Russians came into Cuba and they gradually built up to the point where they put missiles that could hit the United States there. And so what the Chinese are doing is taking steps in to see whether they can be tolerated there. In many ways, right, trying to get a foothold in the door, and then, right, it's the training base is next. And once you have a training base, right, well, are they bringing weapons? What are they bringing in? And now all of a sudden, it's not that you have intelligence, 90 miles from Florida. It's that you have Chinese weapons and systems, Chinese aircraft, perhaps, Chinese aircraft carriers now transiting between the United States and Cuba. So that's what they're trying to do. But it's a very dangerous game for both the Cubans and the Chinese, right? The United States, right, the Kennedy administration did not, take warmly to when the Russians did that, and they responded, fairly aggressively once it became public. So now that this is public and we know that there's going to be training there, what happens when missiles and aircraft and ships start showing up? The Chinese have started doing that in Djibouti, right, in Africa, and they're putting ships, and so they're slowly testing the water to see what they can get away with without ratcheting things up. And we're allowing them to, in many ways, we're like the frog in the proverbial, boiling pot of water where the heat's being turned up slowly. We don't notice it.